loud. So good afternoon, Bob. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm going to actually start by formally introducing you. So I should call you Dr. Robert Ramdhanie, MBE. And just to say as well that you're a true man of the Caribbean. I know you were born and brought up in Trinidad. I believe your mother is from Guyana. And that whilst you've kind of lived and worked in England for over 50 years now, you spend much of your time, it seems, traveling between the UK, Barbados, and Guyana. So really, you're a true man of the Caribbean. Um, and I think it's just useful for our listeners to know that you've been chronicling and contributing to the Black arts arena in the UK for decades, and in particular, Black dance traditions. You were the director of the Handsworth Cultural Centre and the Cave Art Centre, co-founder of dance groups, Mystics and the Israelites, Kokuma Dance Company, and Danse d'Afrique. Also co-founder and manager of the cappella quintet Black Voices. You've traveled extensively, I know, throughout Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean, promoting Black performance artists. It's a strange thing, really, because I know that originally you graduated as an electrical engineer, so it's not really where I expected you to go. You completed an MA in social work. You have an MBA in business, and of course, more recently, you successfully completed your PhD in African dance in England at Warwick University. Um, I understand you've also got a few awards, certainly a lot more than most people I know. One, I think you got the first Entrepreneur Lifetime Achievement Award, and also, of course, the MBE, which you received for your contribution to dance development in the West Midlands. As importantly, you're also the co-founder and director of the Rupununi Music and Arts Festival in Guyana. Some would say it's in South America, some would say it's in the Caribbean, but yeah, basically on the continent of South America. And your book, The Black Dance Movement in England, 1940 through to 2000, was recently published by Routledge. To be specific, I think the 4th of March 2026, so fairly recently. So it's really exciting to be with you today, Bob, and I'm very privileged to be having this interview with you. I wondered if we could start really by thinking a bit about if you could just tell us about your childhood in Trinidad and how music, movement, performance, how did that show up in your everyday life in Trinidad? I'm kind of trying to think like, how did you get into it before you came to Britain?
Well, first of all, Juanita, thank you so much for your very kind words and going through my life academically and otherwise, because often you forget whatever your first degree or whether you went to university or not. So my interest, I suppose, was stemmed in, as you would know, in little villages throughout the Caribbean. There are always two or three fundamental, I will call them buildings: the church, the rum shop, the school. The church, you hear music all the time. You know, they open windows and open doors. On a Sunday morning or Friday night, it's the beautiful rhythm of drums, the singing, the praising. The rum shop, well, the jukeboxes are giving you the most lewd calypsos you want to hear. We have we have that tradition of there's a continuum in our lives. The traffic, the chatting, the people at the bus stops, there's always a buzz and a sound.
Mm.
And in my little village in St. Margaret's in Claxton Bay, South Trinidad, there was always Shango, Voodoo, the Shouter Baptist, the Presbyterian Church, the Indian drumming, the tassas, the wedding, the funerals, And all of those was music and sound. And as a young boy, I remember being quite close to our neighbors who, in those days in Trinidad, all my uncles in the village, and most of my uncles, the people I call uncles and aunties, were from Grenada. And they would all say, you must not go by that tent, you know. You must be aware of them Obia people. So drumming, I used to sneak under the tents. Whereas with the Indians, when there was a wedding or there was church, they would ring a bell, and that was the sign like the prayers are finished and they'd be sharing food now.
Hmm.
So that even little kids in the village, that's the only time you will rush to the Hindu temple or whatever when the food was being shared. And in the voodoo tents, or um, as I said, our miseducation, we said obia and witchcraft and everything, there would be the killing of goats and of cockerels and this sacrifice. So we would look under the tent and you would see the dancing and you would hear that drumming. And literally, you got into a sort of trance yourself. And I think into a trance, not by being, in a sense, as they say, inverted commas, being uploaded by a spirit, but in a trance of fear. you were
Hmm.
you were scared because there was blood everywhere. There was the dancing, there was the shouting, and this beautiful dancing. And I used to think as a little kid, but I didn't realize then how much of an impact it had on me, to be honest. I was just surrounded with it. And I remember even at school in Trinidad, people always called me fingers because I was always tapping. My fingers were never still. It was always tapping a drum beat or something. So fingers was my pet name at school in Trinidad. And when I arrived in London in the 1960s, I had two things: a scout neckerchief and a woggle, because I belonged to the scout group, and I had a pair of bongos. Don't ask me why, but they traveled to London with me. And I should also add, like every decent Caribbean person, I had albums by Jim Reeves as well. So
I think everybody across the world. I mean, I can remember growing up in Nigeria, my mother singing all day long to Jim Reeves. That was her favorite person. But
so yeah,
I'm really struck by what you're saying because, especially of your childhood. I mean, guessing you're kind of talking about the 1950s context, maybe.
yeah,
And
late 50s, 60s.
late 50s and 60s, yeah. And so it's fascinating to me. Obviously, I didn't grow up in the Caribbean. So this idea that in a way it feels that Indo-Caribbean culture was much more open and considered more orthodox then than maybe these secret African practices. I mean, Obeah, I believe, was against the law at that point.
They were
Um,
banned. Yeah.
it maybe probably still is. I know certainly in some parts of the Caribbean it still is considered against the law. So I can see the immediate attraction to this sort of taboo, and you know, it's the worst thing a parent can ever say to a child is don't do or don't go to this place. You're obviously going to go straight there. But so I guess the other thing I'm quite interested in is did you ever experience any kind of pushback from your parents? I mean, were they aware that you had this growing fascination with African-centered dancing?
Well, in a sense, no, because my mum, um, who died when I was quite young, but my mum was, well, I will say now, was disabled. So from birth, I grew up with a mum who was paralyzed, who had a stroke and who was paralyzed on. So my mum lived in Port of Spain with her elder sister, my auntie. And mum will come and see us in the village. on weekends because I grew up there with grandparents.
I see.
And yeah, so mom lived in town. My dad, strangely enough, who I never met in my life until I was age 25 and married, and he didn't know who I was because he left Trinidad when I was 3 months old to go to Dublin to do medicine, which was the practice in those days.
Yes.
Mostly young men from parents, as you know, in the Caribbean. There were only three um, academic areas of study we were sent to study in the UK:
Mm,
medicine, law, engineering. We knew nothing else. So my dad was in Dublin doing medicine. My mum, who was a nurse in Trinidad until she had a stroke. So my mum was disabled.
mm,
Um, and the little story about my mum is, if you can imagine, your whole right side is paralyzed, your arm and your legs, you have no movement in at all. And my beautiful mother will be at the sink in Trinidad with what I think Guyanese call a juking board or scrubbing
mm,
board,
mm,
in that sink with her left hand,
mm,
washing clothes,
mm.
doing that in the, so her right hand will be there just lying.
Yeah.
And
So,
I
so
used to
just
go,
just for the younger generation, that it's like it looks almost like a chopping board, but with serrated edges, and then you just push the cloth up and down the
you just
board.
push the clothes up and down.
Yeah, yeah,
So there was nothing like washing machines and so in
no,
those days. But the fun I used to have with this beautiful woman was I'll go up to mum and I'll lift her right arm, which I said had no life. I would
yeah.
just lift it and then drop it back in her and says, "Go on, mum, hit me, hit me."
Oh my goodness, you sound like you were trouble.
While she was busy working, I was playing.
Yeah.
So in that sense, there was my two older brothers, my three older brothers at the time, and I were living in the village. My sister, we had one, there were five of us, four boys, one girl, but my sister was living in Port of Spain with mum, and the four boys were in the little village. So I went to school in my village, went to church in my village, joined the scouts in my village, and then I moved to San Fernando, which
Mm,
is the second town in Trinidad, where we then all lived together with mum before mum died because she died very young. So my looking under tents and waiting for the bell at the pujas, the Indian pujas where you go, was all done with friends, young boys of my own age in the
mm,
village. We played cricket together, we played football together, we did everything together.
mm,
While your elder brothers were at college,
mm.
we were there straight from school. And on weekends, while you're cleaning house and doing your bits and pieces, you're just waiting for the drums to start.
Yeah.
Off you will go.
That's so interesting because I think when I was originally thinking about your entry into the dance movement here in the UK, I couldn't quite work out how that transition worked. But the way you're describing now that community was such a central part of your upbringing, these sort of networks of people that you were coming together with and sharing your life with. I can see now, coming to the UK, it would have been quite natural to fit in with other people who'd come from different parts of the Caribbean and coalesce together, I guess, around culture and those kinds of activities. But I wonder if you could just say a bit more about what did the dance world in Britain actually look like when you first arrived?
Well, again, the book speaks about it, and you've just mentioned it. When I came to London, there were, in a sense, no black dance schools.
Mm,
Of course, there were ballet schools, and there were a few contemporary dance groups. So that the whole formation of the arts in the Caribbean, the movement in the Caribbean, was predominantly community driven. community-based. It was not academic. And I joke very often with young black dancers in England when you were chatting to them, and they would say, there was no such thing in black dance until I graduated and started to perform. And I always look at them and have a little laugh. And I said, but do you know that you're dancing on the shoulders of black people who were dancing for centuries?
Mm.
You didn't start the black dance movement, believe it or not.
Mm.
And which is why deliberately the book is entitled The Black Dance Movement. It was not black dance groups.
Right.
Movement implying that, and certainly in the UK, it grew out of communities.
Mm.
When I got to London, we then had, in those days, and sadly we don't have it now, the Commonwealth Institute. And I remember going to the Commonwealth Institute regular, where I first saw Bosco Holder Dance Company,
Mm.
where I saw Ekome Dance Company from Bristol. And you would see Limbo, because the I think it was called the West Indian Center, not Caribbean, in
That's right.
Earl's
Yeah, it was the
Court.
West Indian Centre.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the West Indian Center in Earl's Court, and
Yeah.
um, Africa House.
Yes.
So those were places I visited regular. One, because we had friends from all the Caribbean. And again, if I go back to the 60s in England, we weren't going then very often to nightclubs. There was racism. There was something called London, a highly developed so-called city where petrol stations closed at 6, where the tubes stopped running at 10. And I think I've just come from a tiny island where petrol stations are open 24 hours, where transport was 24 hours, and so-called developed England, where things didn't open on a Sunday.
Mm.
So you created, again, as community, you created your own social
Mm.
ways to socialize, to party, to go to church, to go to school, to go to unis, whatever you were doing, it was always community driven.
Mm.
So that weekends you would get together and
Mm.
we'd go in the park. Clapham Common used to be regular, or go down to Hyde Park and we play cricket all day. And then you think, oh my God, you have to leave Marble Arch pretty quickly to get on the last tube to go back to. And I was living in Teutonbeck. so
Mm.
you, so your social construct was based on and grew from
Mm.
family and friends network.
Mm.
A lot of the Caribbean, my sister was a nurse. My sister was in the UK, in London already. My brother was there already. He was in the Royal Marines. The best man at my wedding was in the Royal Air Force. My great friend from school was in the Army. And I had all my mates, and they were mostly Trinidad and Guyanese at colleges we went to in Wimbledon Business School. I was doing engineering, and they were in business. So a lot of life then
Mm.
was community driven.
Mm. And
So
it
therefore,
seems like it was very around those. Certainly, when you first arrived into Britain, it seems people automatically gravitated around the West Indian Centre or the Commonwealth Institute, or there were very key places people went to meet initially. So I guess
yes,
that's how you made those connections. You met
and
people.
also there were a couple of black pubs. Well, no, they were not black owned, but there were a couple of pubs. There was one in not Ladbroke Grove, one on the Baker Street. The name, it had an Irish name, but there would be steel band on a Saturday night. And there was a Trini later who became a very great friend and is still a great friend up to today, who used to sell roti there every Saturday night, which was another um, magnet. And of course, I don't have to say Carnival and Ladbroke Grove then became a
Mm,
central annual meeting point.
mm,
Um, Again, in the early days, you look forward to that.
yeah,
Those were, and
yeah.
also I would think when I moved to Birmingham, um, because from London, I then left London, went to university in Leicester, and that's where I did probation. And both my kids were born in Leicester, and my wife, um, who came from Uganda, said to me, "Oh, we should stay in Leicester. London is a bit too busy. It'd be great to bring the kids up in Leicester." And Leicester really was a little bit too quiet for me. So I said it was either going back to London or moving to Birmingham. Because during the when I was doing my MA in social work, a lot of the students were from Birmingham.
Mm.
And again, ironically, life is a wonderful thing. They would all say to me, the students, "Bob, so what are you going to do when you graduate? Where are you going to go? Are you going back to London?" I said, my wife wasn't really interested. So I'm looking at Birmingham, and they will all say, "Well, no matter what you do, make sure, like your parents, as you said, Juanita, earlier on, make sure you do not go to Handsworth." Why? That's where all the blacks are. That's where. And as I said, when the probation service in Birmingham invited me to come to Birmingham, I did my interviews and etc. And then they said, "And where would you like, which office would you like to work in?" I'd never been to the place. I said, "Handsworth."
Right. Wow, that is so fun. Well, I mean, because I found it really fascinating. I don't want to sound like I'm being stereotypical, but I don't often meet people of Indo-Caribbean heritage with such an embedded love of and interest in African heritage cultures. They may be familiar with them, but not really have been something that's integrated into their everyday lives. And it sounds very much like it was something that was almost the core of who you have been over these years.
It's my life.
It's your life, yeah. So
It's my life.
I found that quite fascinating because I was thinking in Trinidad, well, you talked about the churches, but then there would have been the temples. And so yeah, but I think you've kind of explained the trajectory because if you were brought up by your grandparents, there's a different dynamic there. I feel like you would have had more room, more freedom perhaps um to find your way into spaces that maybe if your parents had been, I don't know, I find it very interesting that you um yeah, that became such a focus of interest in Trinidad, maybe unconsciously, but did.
I
And then
said,
it took you into because as well, I've met a lot of Guyanese, actually both of both African and Indian heritage, who have a strong interest in Indian dance. Um, but I wanted to ask you specifically because I thought it was fascinating that you started the book in the 1940s, given that your experience is from the 60s onwards. And I'm just interested, how difficult was it to find out about what the dance movement was like in Britain in the 1940s?
very, very difficult, to be honest. And the reason I started in 1940s is that I have various articles and paragraphs in other people's books. And in one of them, I wrote about Ballet Negre, Jamaican, uh, two Jamaican, I would say, choreographers who are putting music together, Berta Pasuka and Richard Riley. And because I had done some research on them before for other articles and journals and so, I knew They started in 1946. So, as a good starting point, it was to look at the 40s to see whatever else there was. And we've had the difference in the book in talking about the last century is that there've been recent publications and there are scattered bits of notes that you can collect because there was dance in London in the 16th and 17th century.
Mm,
People wined and supped and went to balls with their ladies, as is it's described that, and they danced until 3:40 a.m. on Fleet Street.
mm,
The difference with what I have done is twofold. One, I have attempted as best as I could research to name those people, because that to me is the key. When we talk about ballet in the UK or we talk about ballet, we talk with such fond regards for Margot Fonteyn or Rudolf Nureyev or other dancers, Alvin Ailey, African Americans, and so. And when we speak of Black and Caribbean dance, we speak of Black Caribbean dance. We don't mention any names. But I'd like us to speak of Peter Badejo from Nigeria, Bode Lawal from Nigeria, the Holder brothers from Trinidad,
mm,
uh, Jeanette Springer, who is still alive from Guyana and who's worked with me very, very closely over the years.
mm,
Cy Grant, another famous Guyanese who had a program in London in the 40s and 50s with having calypsos and news items about the Caribbean. And Cy made a significant contribution to Black culture. And Cy was most definitely, as you know, a former pilot in World War
yes.
II in the
I was
UK.
actually always astonished by how Psy had been very much embraced by the BBC. You know, this whole thing of him singing the news at the end
Yeah.
in his calypsos at the end. It was always quite weird to me that you had this context of racism, but there was this man on the BBC singing calypsos at the end, and obviously very much loved. So it's
But you know
fascinating.
why?
No.
Interestingly, Cy was in the Air Force. So to English eyes, the BBC didn't see him as Black at that time. They saw him as someone who had made a significant contribution to the war effort.
Yeah, that's really important. And if I may say, your book, I think that's what I like with your book because we talk so much in Britain of this kind of Windrush generation. But really, you can't think of the Windrush generation without remembering their contribution to
Yeah.
that Second World War, because that's what actually enables them to make those inroads. Because of, people are familiar with the fact that they served during the war. So yes, that's a very good point about Psy. The other thing I was thinking of, or because I have a bit of a I'm very interested in Windrush, but I also sometimes get a bit frustrated with the way it obscures the black presence before Windrush, and I think of people like Snake Hips Johnson. I don't know if he's like one of the people you mention in your book.
No, I haven't, but I'm aware of him. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was here in Britain in the late 1930s and then very popular at the beginning of the war. Unfortunately, I think he actually got killed during the war in Café de Paris. But there clearly was a black presence here in the UK in that earlier period and people who were very popular with their dance. So I love that you managed to do it, but I was really curious about how because I know it's quite an under-researched area,
Yeah.
but also, the source material, the primary source material is quite hard to get hold of.
Well, I am blessed in many ways that people like, if you remember Alex Pascal from Grenada,
Yeah.
Alex was the first BBC Black radio reporter. Alex and his wife, I did loads of interviews with Alex. Alistair Bain, who also came from Grenada, and I have to say, Alex and Joyce are still alive. Alistair is still alive. He's not very well, but he's in London and he's still alive. Everett Puckering, who is dancing for a very, very long time with the Holder Boys. Greta Mendes, a Trinidadian, again alive and kicking. And all these people were involved in the 60s and the 70s and are still around. And believe it or not, when I did the book presentation in Birmingham, I had drummers and dancers. So we did a lovely sort of a performance presentation where, again, I was interviewed by Derek Anderson. And there are pictures of Derek Anderson in the book. Derek actually danced in one of the dance groups I formed. And Derek Anderson is today the flight lieutenant, I think is his time. He is the representative of the King in the West Midlands.
Wow.
Derek danced with me. Derek interviewed me on the day I did the presentation. Baroness Amos, as you will know, Valerie Amos, I mentored as a young lady doing her first degree at Aston University. I actually took Val with me as a youth leader when I took a group of young Jamaicans who were born in Birmingham, and we took them on a trip to Jamaica on an educational. Val was one of the young trainees, again, a prominent Guyanese. She's one of the patrons of the festival, as is David Dabadine, as is Shifri Rampal was, Melanie McTurk was, not Melanie,
Diane? Diane McTurk?
Diane McTurk
Yeah.
was. Melanie is still alive and kicking.
Yes.
Diane. So in and I'm kind of linking there the book and the interest in the festival in Guyana.
Yes.
I, as a young family growing up in the Caribbean, as I said, you knew your mom was from Guyana, full
Yeah.
stop.
Yeah.
I knew my dad was from Trinidad, but I wasn't around my dad. He was never
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
So even if we went to Guyana, and I probably think we did twice to Georgetown when we were quite young, was to meet the extended family.
Mm.
I remembered nothing of that at all, but I just remember going to Georgetown and coming back home.
Mm.
But we had Guyanese from Guyana coming to spend time with us in Trinidad with my auntie, my auntie in Port of Spain, God bless her soul, that they had 13 kids, and yet they always had us because my mom was disabled. They always had other cousins from Guyana staying there. As the older ones, most of them went to the States, most of them were doing medicine. Those who went to England were doing medicine. So that house was a real Guyanese hothouse
Yeah.
of transition.
And
There
energy
were always
as well. I
people,
can
yeah,
imagine the energy.
always people coming
Yeah.
through. And so when I went back to Guyana, really talking about the festival in 2013, 2014, when we did the first festival, Clement Lai, did you ever come across Clement?
I don't think so. No, I vaguely recognize the name, but I don't think I've actually
They,
personally met him.
Clement had a restaurant in Georgetown called the Coal Pot,
Hmm.
which was the place to go to. Everybody, every Guyanese knows the Coal Pot.
Yeah.
So, and Clement and I are first cousins.
Oh, okay.
So when I was going back now as a grown human being, not as a kid thinking, where am I going to Guyana? And all I remember was pepper pot.
Hmm.
And that's all I was interested in. But Claremont, I remember coming back as an adult when we were talking about the festival in Guyana. Then I began to inquire. Claremont organized a family sort of reunion in Georgetown for me to meet families. And when I got to the restaurant, the door was closed, but I could see the place was full. Anyway, I went in. There were Afros, there were Chinese, there were Indians, there were Portuguese. And he said, "Oh, these are all your cousins, your aunties, and your uncles." Just about everyone from the United Nations was there and related by blood in some way.
How wonderful.
Because granddad had concubines and wives and children, and
Yeah.
they had children and grandchildren.
Yeah. Well, as I say, you're a true man of the Caribbean. You've got everything going. That
Yes.
sounds even more wonderful and more enriching. That's really beautiful. But I wanted to take you back. I'm going to come back to the festival in the Rupununi because I want to hear a lot more about what you're doing at the moment. But if I could just take you back a moment, can I just ask, so who were the people that you were kind of collaborating with in the UK? Um, and how did those relationships actually influence the dance scene in the UK? I'm particularly interested in Birmingham. I mean, when you said you went to Handsworth, is that where a lot of the sort of action, as it were, took place? Is that the scene of uh, the evolution of Bob Randami in the dance movement? Is that the main hub?
Well, I think even today, maybe, certainly for people in Birmingham and maybe in the UK, when you mention Handsworth, that's like Brixton used to be in the good old days.
Absolutely,
You
yes.
don't want to live in Brixton. You don't want to live in Handsworth. I chose Handsworth. I lived and I worked. And as a probation officer, I'm in and out of prisons. I'm in and out of courts. So I would make sure I knew all the youth clubs in Handsworth, all the places to eat and where you can get jerk chicken and rice and peas at 4 in the morning. I knew all the places that had shebeens. I knew all the dark, getting weed and having a draw was as common as buying a pack of Rothmans. So you knew everything. And of course, you knew people in prison who would then say, "Bob, when you go out, check so and so for me, tell him, boop, boop, boop." So you had a network. I went to church there. I was in the youth movement there. So I had connections at church, connections in the prison service, connections in the youth. And I'm a great believer in, if you want to see change, get involved and make it yourself. So when I got to Birmingham, I still had my bongos. I had seen quite a few dance companies. Dance was most certainly even more in my blood. I bought a djembe. I bought a couple of African drums. And at the probation service, I had a couple of Rasta guys who were on probation to me. I read up about Nyabingi, Rastas, and also then I started going to Africa myself. Um, and I could talk about that for years, building friendships in Ghana in particular, in building a home in Ghana, in living there, in traveling across Africa.
Mm.
But we started doing drumming in the probation office. I will wait till probation colleagues finish work at 5, and most of them went home. And in the staff room, I just moved the chair around. Rasta brothers would come and we would drum. Don't ask me why.
Mm.
I bought drums. Guys, what are you doing this evening? And imagine these were folks on probation to me. So we had to see each other. And I would say, well, finish this evening. Come on, we play some drums. That was it. We started drumming. Then I discovered, and she's mentioned in the book, Herman McIntosh, a young lady, started a dance group with young kids. And she started it with a Ghanaian, Ben Badu, and they were called Sankofa. So I
Mm.
went to see Herman, and these were young kids from school, and they would come after school. And again, a lovely story from Herman. When I said to her, "So what did the parents think of these young children? She says, when I mentioned to the parents, I am going to start an African dance group, they all, and these are all Black parents, they all said, capital N-O. We do not want our children involved. They are not Africans. We
Mm.
do not want them involved. And Herman says, she thought about it, and then she says to a group of parents, okay, what if after school they come to me, I help them do their homework, so the homework is done, and then we do a little bit of drumming and so for exercises. And they agreed. So Herman had this young group, and I said to her, but are there any teenagers dancing? And she says no. And as I said, my subscript to life is if you want to see something happen, make it happen. I
Mm.
thought, right, the drummers are drumming. And I said to them, what about if we get some dancers? Okay, that might be nice. Oh, I suppose the rest of the guys were thinking from their perspective as male, yeah, Bob, you go and get some nice young women. Yeah, that'd be nice. So I wrote to a couple of schools and um, Pat Donaldson notably responded. Pat now lives in Miami. Again, she's mentioned in the book. She has in the last paragraph, in the last chapter, she has written her story.
Mm.
I asked 7 women to write their journeys into dance, and Pat was one of the,
Yeah, you've got that section in their own words, and
yeah,
that's what
in their
they
own words.
write. Yeah. Mm.
And Pat came with a couple of friends, I think Audrey um, and Eileen. So we had no notion. So I go back to this sense of community. And here, if I refer to the terminology of the book, identity, spirituality, and continuity. So they grabbed on this notion of African drumming and dancing. The first thing that when they start talking to me about was how it was a fantastic opportunity for them to feel who they were,
Mm.
not to be perceived as a Paki or a Wog or a whatever, but for
Mm.
them to internalize
Mm.
who they felt, and many of them truly became African people, young
Mm.
people to the core. So it was their identity. And again, I remember standing at a performance where Pat was probably seen at school as most young kids were Black kids, as
Mm.
truculent. And at a performance, there was this um, white school teacher standing, and I use the word white deliberately, school teacher standing next to me. And she knew me and she says, my God, Bob, look at those dancers. Look at that young lady. How excellent she is. And I looked at her and I said, would you believe those are one of the young ladies that you all always had in suspension, who
Mm.
you always told she was worth nothing, who was always, and she says that in her story. Bob, I thank you for mentoring me,
Mm.
for I have seen many of my fellow soldiers, Black young soldiers, fallen to drugs and to prison,
Mm.
where I was able, through dance, to
Mm.
move out of that because I discovered who self was. And I thought that was very, very profound by Pat as a young, as and again, you read her words, very, very interesting because
It's very profound. You're giving me goosebumps actually because I think one of the things about the period that you're writing about is the level of racism that people were faced with. And I love the way that because you came from community, you didn't just go to work and that's your job 9 to 5 and you stop thinking about what it means to be a probation officer after 5. You used that role that you were in to then take care of the wider community who had got themselves into bother and trouble or whatever. but then to help turn their lives around. And there's a concept that people talk about a lot nowadays. There's a book, I think, by a gentleman called Cleaver Cruz that's called The Black Joy Project. And I realized that for a lot of Black people, when you're experiencing racism all the time, when you feel marginalized, sometimes you forget the importance of being intentional about Black joy, making space to have that joy. And I just am so struck by how many lives you must have really touched and changed just for the fact that you brought that joy, of movement, of dance, of music. It's such a joyous thing to then be able to introduce to younger people, particularly those who've been incarcerated or, having difficult backgrounds and living in a difficult environment. It's so wonderful, and I'm really touched by that's what you've actually done and brought to British society. I don't know whether you did it consciously or not, but it really is so yeah, it's very moving to know that that's what you've contributed,
Oh,
because it's more than just dance.
well, when I was still involved in the dance movement, but for example, when Black Voices are a classic case, now they weren't in trouble
Mm,
or with the prison or anything, but I had a radio program in Birmingham called Callaloo,
mm,
and a good friend of mine, Carol Pemberton, um, I think she suggested it. Um, I think, yeah, she said, Bob, let me make some jingles because she was singing with a group.
mm,
Well, no, she was singing with a few sisters. Anyway, and they made some radio jingles for me. And then one day, Carol and I were chatting, and I said to her, why don't we? Oh, I think we both kind of came up with the idea. Why don't we start a singing group? Now, I had kind of more or less been now on the dance group scene for many, many years. So let's have a musical. Anyway, Carol was wonderful and powerful and brought some friends together. Juanita, they are still going. And
that
if
is
we go back to the 1980s, Black Voices,
wonderful.
I gave them their name,
Mm,
Black Voices, music with a message. The strapline is registered to me.
mm,
And here are five Black women using the power of the human voice.
mm,
When most of them joined, I don't think they even had passports. I cannot recall if they had traveled, if they didn't have passports.
mm,
When I left Black Voices 22 years ago, we had seen and traveled to at least 60% of the world.
wow.
And these were young Black women out of churches. One or two of them had kids who were committed. And my excitement at the moment is to write my second book, not so much on Black voices, but one, to give them names for contributions they have made. When we speak about a cappella in the UK,
Mm,
they will always say the Cambridge Singers or the this or the that, organized again, graduates at universities or in church choirs. Here is a community group, Black
mm,
community group. And very much like dance was used as identity, Black voices, and our strapline says it,
mm,
music with a message. Black voices was about peace.
mm,
And when we sung gospels and spirituals, and in the later years, when we started to do meaningful reggae, because we
mm,
meant our byline,
mm,
music with a message,
mm.
what impact that had on folks all over the world. I'll get notes from people when we performed in Singapore saying, you
Mm.
know, they made me think about Jesus,
Oh,
or they made me think about peace, or I was standing in Germany, and this guy was about 6'6", a big, tough German. And when they sang in the upper room, he was doing this, goose pimples.
yeah, yeah.
So we were singing across the languages, but the message in the
Mm,
gospel.
mm,
So my whole kind of thing about that, I'd never thought about it before until I started writing,
mm,
is the power
mm.
that Black music, gospel and spiritual, has on world peace. And if
Yes,
there
for
was
sure.
no gospel
Mm.
and no spirituals, more than what we're seeing now, the world would be at war. Believe you me.
No, I believe that. I mean, I do think black music's extremely powerful, can transform people. I mean, it's so moving in so many different
Yeah.
ways. Yeah, I mean, I've often thought about that actually as an idea because black music's provided the foundation for global music everywhere. And you just think of how powerful that can be, even around campaigning, getting people, even especially when I think about African music, is there's a French band that used to sing about Ebola and what to do when you have Ebola or what to do when you have COVID. Just the way Africans use it as a way of transmitting messages, but positivity, joy, love, all of these things. And there's something very I want to say that it brings you back to being very humane. There's something
Yes.
about music that brings out the real humaneness of people, which I love. I wanted before I come back now to the Rupunini to ask you one last question about your book. Um, what do you think is the single most important kind of insight that you want readers to gain by the reading of this book?
That your brothers and sisters have made, like other Black people, a significant contribution to British culture that has been not recorded.
Mm,
So I'd like people to say, like my daughter has a wonderful statement. When she was quite young, she wrote a poem to me one day, and it says, "Dad, the beat of the drum, that's what drives you in life. The beat of the drum." And there's a tempo and there's a meaning that that drum has given to us that
mm,
others have tried to deny.
mm,
So the book is about
mm,
naming
mm.
people who have contributed to
Yeah.
British history. And by that, so you see these modern contemporary dance groups, and you see all the young people, and they now, it's still difficult, but they can apply for grants. And Juanita, in our days, for you to get a grant in a community dance group was like asking a stone for blood. You number of hoops you had to drop in. And the book shows you when they started funding dance companies, if a white dance group applied for money for dance, they got funding from the dance budget.
Mm,
If a black group applied for money for dance, we got funded under ethnic minorities,
mm,
other, this, that, because our art forms are not perceived as art.
mm,
We saw it as community development, at ethnic arts, as this arts, as minority arts. We never saw it as dance. And that shift became because of the hard work we were doing in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So
yeah.
you young black dancer, whether you're in ballet today or contemporary dance, my
Mm.
question remains, do you know whose shoulder you're dancing on?
Yeah. And I
That
think what's powerful too is that dance and music. is a unifying force. I mean, people across all ethnic groups come together to dance together. Even like, I think of the carnival. So it's been a really important part of changing the race dynamics of Britain.
Yeah.
Um, so it's really powerful, and I look forward to having a proper read of your book. And I love the subtitle actually, Identity, Spirituality, and Continuity. I wanted to come then. So you theoretically, I thought, of course, a few years ago that you'd retired, but clearly retiring is not is not in your vocabulary. So you then went on to conceive of the Rupununi Music and Arts Festival, and I think when I first heard about it, I thought, gosh, how extraordinary! Why has he chosen the Rupununi? Because it was so far removed. And then I thought, well, actually, that makes it the absolute best place for it to be because it's such a beautiful part of Guyana. Um, it drives the sort of traffic to the Rupununi in the way that people maybe wouldn't otherwise have gone there. But I'm still fascinated by you sort of living mostly, I guess, in Barbados. How did you choose the location? I mean, how was it the Rupununi became the site for this arts and music festival?
Well, let me give full credit to a wonderful Guyanese, Keith Waite.
Hmm.
So I start with Keith Waite, and then I'll show you the connection to the Rupinuni. Keith, beautiful musician, as you know. I managed for a while. We lived in London. We shared many moments
Yeah.
over the
I bet
years
everybody would
together.
know him as the Guyanese flautist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great friend. As a matter of fact, when I was in the UK, I thank him for the beautiful tea and cakes we made. We had an evening together. Thanks, Keith. Um, so Keith came, phoned me up in London and said, um, I've just come back from Guyana Ball and I went on a trip and I think it was with Tony Toast. I can't remember the name of the trip. Anyway, um, I went on a trip and we ended up at Rockview
At
in
Colin Edwards'
Anau,
place. Is that where Colin Edwards is based?
Collins' place.
Yes.
We ended up there. We had dinner. And then when we finished, I took my flute out and I played. So that's what Keith said. And then the people had a chat, he and Colin, and he said to Colin, this would be a nice place for a jazz festival.
Mm.
Okay, that's the beginning. Keith phones me up. He said, Bob, I hear you're retired. I said, yes. He said, so like everybody think when you retire, so you have nothing to do with life now. So I've got Colin coming up. He's going to the Czech Republic and he's going to stop in London. I'd like you to meet Colin. Colin is the guy I told you about at Rockview, and we can have an idea about having a jazz festival.
Mm.
So I said to Keith, listen, jazz is a very minority within a minority music loving people. So
Mm.
a Rupununi festival starts from -0 as an audience. So knock that on the head. But anyway, we'll meet, and we have. So we met at the South Bank. Seems to be the place I meet all the good people. And we had dinner, and then that was it. Then Colin went back to Guyana and kept phoning me, and I said to Keith, to be honest, I'm not sure I like Colin. Um, there was something in me that just says that. So I
Yeah.
said, I think it's a non-starter. And secondly, I told you my thing about jazz. It's a
Yeah.
very small thing.
Yeah. Community.
That
Yeah.
was it. Anyway, Colin kept phoning me and Keith mentioned that you're retired and why don't you come and spend no payment, come and see what Rockview is like. Blah, 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 blah. Long story short, jumped on a plane to Guyana in my innocence, not thinking that the Rupununi is as far from Georgetown as is Barbados or Trinidad. So I got there and then I said to folks, well, okay, I need to get to this place called Anai.
Mm.
And they said to me, you can take a minibus that could probably take you 26 or 27 hours because there are hardly any roads or whatever. Or you can fly. And there are these little planes that go in. As a person who suffers from vertigo, plane didn't sound exciting. As somebody who is going into Guyana for 2 weeks to spend literally 3 days in a minibus, didn't grab me either. Because I didn't know anybody at all. Claremont, my cousin, by this time had left Guyana and were living. They lived in Tobago for a while. They lived in Trinidad for a while. No, I think he went back. He was living in Letton. Anyway, I decided I'll fly in. I got there, this titchy aircraft flying above the top of trees that I always think I was going to hit. I was sick like a dog when I got there. I was vomiting. I was sick. My vertigo had. I came off the plane, sick like a dog. The next morning, I wrote to my kids. I said, you know, when I moved to Barbados, I said I was living in paradise. My karma, I'm at peace with my life, my soul, with everything around me. I end up in this place called Anai, and I discovered I'm in heaven.
Mm.
And that has not changed.
Mm.
The beautiful Pacaraima Mountains, the wonderful, open, loving people, the quietness of the space. And then when you realize peace on all sorts of levels cannot equate to this silence that is so
Mm.
uplifting and inspiring in the
Mm.
Rupununi. I fell in love with it.
Mm.
So we did. I invited the first year friends from Zambia, from
Mm.
India, from Pakistan, with Keith from the Ukraine, or musicians I was working with in the UK who would come for free as long as I paid for them. And if you all are listening, now it's changed. You can come and I will pay you, but you have to find your way there.
I was going to say, how to spend all your retirement money in one go.
I did. I did. The first 2 years cost me, I was broke after the first 2 years
Yeah.
because, for a start, it was something unheard of. Not
Mm.
only we were going to have a festival in the Amazon, we were calling it a camping festival. We were calling it a world music festival.
Mm.
We were not having it for one night, we were having it for 3 nights.
Mm.
How stupid can you be?
Yeah. Talk about
And
ambition. Mm.
and therein lies the start of your conversation.
Mm.
Being where we are is both our strength
Mm.
and our biggest weakness.
Mm.
We've had then, so we did the first one in 2014. We did 2015. I was broke in 2016. We did 2017 in Georgetown. We did 2018 at Manari Ranch. Then we had COVID. I think we did 3 years online. And then we
Mm.
went back live in 2025.
Mm.
And we're going back this year, 2026, I hope,
Mm.
back to Manari Ranch.
In October, is this?
October 16th to the 18th at Manari Ranch. Funding is always a big issue. The very first one was opened by the current president, Dr. Ali, He was acting Minister of Tourism at the time, and Prime Minister Sam Hinds and President Ali opened the first one. And the government pledged their support to us. This is recorded, that they will support us as long as they were in power, because they believed this was something unique and wonderful. And I could share some beautiful interviews for another of one of your Guyana Speaks interviews with the president, with Caroline Burkett, who is now, as you probably know, is vying to be the UN Secretary General. And they were at the first festival and did our praises. Sadly, today, the government isn't supporting us. And I say this without malice or shame or anything, because they've all acknowledged, even Susan Rodriguez, the new Minister of Tourism, who came to the festival for the first time last year when she became minister, called and said, Bob, I must see you in Georgetown. And we met. And she says, I do not know what I was expecting when I came to Manari Ranch, but what I do know is what I witnessed, experienced, and enjoyed was unbelievable. Yet when we say, and she says to me, Bob, let's have a proposal for what you need for the festival. I'm not asking the government to pay for the entire festival. We're not that. We work hard, we contribute, we have private sector support. Last year, CNO supported us, was our main funder. But every year we are struggling. And but everybody write about it and tell us, government ministers, the PM, the president, who speaks very, very positively about the festival and want to see it happen and doing this and doing that and what good and it can become the biggest cultural event. We are not a pop festival. We are in the
You're
business.
reminding me a little bit about, in a sense, well, no, I guess a global version of Glastonbury. I don't know, it feels a little bit like it might be like a Glastonbury, and I feel like you really had me when you were describing how beautiful Anai was. And for me, that's the biggest selling point about Guyana, is the level of beauty is surpasses anywhere I've ever been anywhere in my life. And
Yeah.
I've been to many countries, and yet there has never been anywhere quite as beautiful as Guyana. Outside, Georgetown, it's Georgetown. For me, as soon as you get into the hinterland and beyond, that's when it becomes an absolutely extraordinary space. And I can really see now the idea of a festival that's in this hinterland space. Um, as a festival where people just come to congregate and enjoy a blend of musics from all over the world. It just feels fabulous. But also how important it is to show that culture is something that is really important and good for the human soul. Because I think one of the things that it disappoints me a little bit about the Guyanese context and environment is I don't feel that the many extraordinary creative people that Guyana gives birth to are properly supported and nurtured. There's Guyanese have done such an extraordinary amount globally, in their contributions in art, in literature, you name it. But it feels like, unfortunately, there isn't the nurturing of it so much nowadays. So I love the fact that you've chosen Guyana as the location that you want to have at this arts and music festival. And certainly we will do as much as we can from Guyana Speaks point of view to really help push and advertise and invite people. I don't know about this year, but were you to do it next year, I would love for Rod and I just to organize a group of people to come and be part of it, because yeah, it just sounds fabulous.
I was talking, first of all, I want to destroy a myth, because to us Western folks, you said when you think of it, you think of Glastonbury. And I want people to think not of Glastonbury at all.
Well, no, that's what that's
No, no,
that's the
no.
bit when you said how beautiful it was. That was when I was suddenly like, this isn't Glastonbury. Because initially I was thinking, oh yeah, people congregating over
No.
art and music, kind of a bit like Glastonbury. And I think the camping, it was the camping, because I always have friends who take their tents off. But it was just the spirit, because Glastonbury is devoid of spirituality. What you
That
were
I want to come back.
describing for
Yes.
me touched then, what made it magical for me was when I
Yes.
suddenly got from you the sense of the spirituality that could be experienced in that location.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
that's what
what
I have
we're
in mind.
selling.
Yeah.
And we're selling, and I'm trying to build bridges with Colombia, Peru, Mexico, our South American neighbors, and our Caribbean neighbors. So, and when people hear festival, that's what they think. Stage, loud music, da, 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 and you go home. No,
Mm,
our plank has been since 2014 and continues today.
mm,
We have an upcycling program. We work with a fabulous elderly creative artist from Suriname. He comes over, he works with kids. We did a pilot project with an orphanage in Georgetown
mm,
where we convert things we ask people to bring in, bits of metal, whatever they find,
mm,
and they work with this guy, and he turns it into some form of a musical instrument.
mm,
So here is the vision just for this one upcycling project. We work, we train people, local people in local villages to collect garbage, what they see as garbage around their homes, and we will train them
mm.
to turn that into some forms, maracas, flutes. He takes bicycle pumps and he makes the most beautiful flute. I could see Keith Wade coming over and teaching people to play on.
Yes.
So the idea is we upskill people.
Mm,
We're looking at in your community village that you can make other things
mm,
to boost tourism sales
mm,
that you're not doing at the moment from recycled rubbish.
mm.
Secondly, in your community, we train a musical ensemble using the stuff they've made themselves to perform at the festival.
Mm,
And they could perform at other villages and they can. So we begin to be, and that is just from the upcycling program. We have a tree planting program where we encouraging communities to plant trees. Start with their home. We're looking to work with Bena Hill Institute in Region 9 to plant around college campus. We started with Paloma Mohammed, prof at UG. We did a pilot project with UG, planting trees on UG's campus. So we have a tree planting. So we have upcycling, we have tree planting. We have a volunteering program teaching people online to be volunteers, to give back to their communities, to do this. We run workshops. Gavin is going into the Ruperti. He should have gone the beginning of June to do a music project where we are now archiving, researching, and recording traditional Makushi songs and dances. And we are starting the festival to grow an archive, and we're giving all the stuff that we archive to each village council. So they too have it, and we will go on and record. So when people hear festival, I do not want them to think one weekend on a stage and there we go. We work all year round, and the idea is to develop. The great news is, and where I know your audience and your listeners will be able to help us, is I hope before I leave, I'm currently in Georgetown. I leave here on the 11th of July, and I'm hoping by then we would have signed off our lease for 10 acres of land in Letham to start building a permanent cultural I could use so many words: cultural center, creative space, Amerindian Museum of Living Cultures, where we train people in theater, music, and dance to share Amerindian history.
Mm,
So you're not just coming and reading something on a pamphlet or a thing on a wall or looking at a picture. You have people. So we've been working on the creation of a living museum of Amerindian culture. And if nothing else, your listeners can do, as I say to my own family and friends, pray for us that we get the land, whoever your God is, whoever you pray to, that we get the land and we get support to develop this. Again, I go back to my basic sense of drive is about creating opportunities for communities.
mm,
I'm an old codger. I don't need anything. I'm losing here. I am going to meet my maker shortly, but I passionately believe in sharing love, skills, knowledge with
mm,
communities so that they become sustainable. They value their cultures. You know, when you think about it, and take Glastonbury, I'm a WOMAD, not a Glastonbury. I went to Glastonbury once in my life. I lost two pairs of boots in the mud, and I vowed never to go back. But all my life, and for 24 years, I've been to WOMAD. I've never lost a boot.
mm. You
No.
know, Bob, I have to say you're 100% speaking my language. I am so I feel so touched and blessed that I've been able to do this interview with you because I really hadn't quite understood how magical a person you are. I One country I went to, Uruguay, has touched me in the most extraordinary way. I mean, they upcycle everything. They care about social responsibility. They care about community. They care about climate change and environment and making sure that everything they're doing is sustainable. And I think one of the things that I find the most frustrating about the world is this whole concept of capitalism that is almost dehumanizing because it hasn't got at its core the human beings that need community, that can do so much more that's rich for each other by working together and not with profits as the ultimate motive, but rather sustainability and nurturing our cultural drives and motivations and things. And you're reminding me, you're a similar personality to very dear, I would like to think of as friend and sister now, a lady I met recently in Georgetown. You may know her, Saida Manboth, who runs a resort in Georgetown called the Rainforest. And it's the most beautiful house I've ever seen in Georgetown, but everything is through upcycling, and she upcycles everything. She's got this wonderful rainforest in her house surrounding her house, and she's just concerned about love and community and environment. And honestly, I feel like in the last year I've met two absolutely wonderful people who speak my language, and that's a major blessing for me. We will do absolutely everything we can from our point to be supporting in you with this. But Bob, I've got 100 more questions, but I realize we're coming to the end of the discussion, and I just want to say how genuinely touched I am by how generous a personality you are and have been throughout your life. And how blessed we are to still have you with us. So I don't want you going on. You're just talking about you're just about to go on the other side. No, we're keeping you here. We need people like you, especially in this peculiar political moment that we're living through. And yeah, I just wish you all the support and best of luck and continued creativity and imagination because honestly, exactly what Guyana needs is this massive kind of cultural um sort of nurturing and center where we can really celebrate being togetherness as human beings being creative. So I really admire everything you're doing. And just thank you so much for your time, Bob.
No, well, thank you very much. And I just, if you spare me one comment
Yes.
that links the book, that links COVID, and it links what we're trying to do with the festival. I've said in the book, as is said in all the history books that are written about the Windrush generation, that Black people from the Caribbean or Africa or India were brought there to help the UK rebuild.
Mhm.
And by that, we meant their infrastructure and their architecture. In the book I wrote, I also mean, and we were there to uplift their spirits and their souls. Because when you saw, and so many people said, you and heard the steel pan or the calypsonians singing their songs of the up-to-date news, you realize that they were uplifting your mental spirits, which was destroyed in the Second World War. So while England was interested in infrastructure development, we were equally contributing to the upliftment of the soul and the spirit.
Mhm.
Then, during COVID, my young Jamaican steel band player deliberately went onto the streets to continue playing steel pan, even though the law was only those who are in necessary jobs to go out. And he said, as far as others were concerned, he was breaking the law and he was prepared to go to law and defend why he was going out. And he said, Bob, I played steel pan in this one spot in Birmingham. And there was this elderly English woman. And the first day she came out, she left £50. And the second day, £100. And on the third day, she came out. He said he had to speak to her and said, that was very kind. And she says, you and your music uplift my soul that neither the TV nor the whole of my family can do.
Mhm.
That's the impact of the
Mhm.
music uh, that we make and have. And it's the same thing I say of the festival. I am not Amerindian, but I know when I see them perform and dance and sing at the festival, and I leave there on a Monday morning or a Thursday to go back to Georgetown, I know my life has been enriched by a human race that has been there long before me, will be there long after me, who live in harmony with their environment and are happy, beautiful people. And that's all we try to do with the music and the communities we engage. Do we leave it 1 inch better than when we met it?
Mhm.
Do we leave humanity any more enriched from our
Mhm.
lives? Those we can go out and earn millions, and Elon Musk and all these people, I don't know how they feel with all their billions, but I just hope they reflect and think, have we or are we leaving the world and peace and humanity 1 inch better than the way we found it? I don't know. Music can do that.
Mhm.
Juanita, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I love that final message that we're all here to leave the world a little bit of a better place than how we met it.
Yeah,
And if that's what we achieve in life, then we've truly achieved. So thank you so much again. Really
thank you very,
blessed.
very
Thank
much.
you.
Have a blessed evening.
You too.
Okay, bye.